Our speaker tonight is Marissa Schlesinger. Tonight's event is sponsored by an FEP grant from the Broward College Student Life Department. Make sure what you signed in are due on your way out, and there's also surveys on the end of the aisles if you don't mind filling those out at the end of the lecture to help give us some feedback. Also, if you're interested in seeing speakers or in this series, make sure you include your email to hear about future speakers so we can put you on our mailing list for that. You only get emails once every month or two when the speaker's coming. Marissa is Associate Dean of Academic Affairs at Gutman Community College of the City University of New York. She received her bachelor's degree in the Art and Archaeology of the Ancient Near East at Smith College in Massachusetts, studied Egyptian and Near Eastern cultures at University College London, England, and received her master's degree in Ancient Studies at the University of Toronto, Canada. Marissa received field archaeology training through Harvard University and has excavated at the Bronze Age sites of Ashkelon, Israel, and the Palace of Nestor, Kora, Greece. She is completing her PhD in Egyptology at the University of Toronto. Her dissertation is a study of the sociological implications of elite bracelets from the mid-2nd millennium Egypt. Marissa has taught art history in the departments of art at Kingsborough Community College and Brooklyn College, both of the City University of New York, and she regularly lectures on ancient Egyptian art and culture at the Metropolitan Museum of Art in New York. I actually met Marissa when I visited the Met Museum of Art and caught her lecture on their practices with mummification. And I was immediately sucked into the lecture and impressed by her knowledge and expertise. And I said to myself, I have to bring her to Broward so my students can hear and learn from her. So when we think about the civilization of ancient Egypt, our curiosity is sparked. Our imagination is awakened. We can probably all think of a book or a movie that takes place in ancient Egypt. Authors and filmmakers find great potential for stories about royal pharaohs and heaps of gold, mummies, gods, and more. Or we wonder, how did they pull off creating those giant pyramids? We do know that over thousands of years that ancient Egyptians thrived. Their systems of organized society ushered in what was the most advanced civilization the world had ever known to date, and it continues to influence us today. So please enjoy the lecture with Marissa. Welcome her, I should say.
Thank you, Lisa. And good evening, everyone. Can you hear me all right? Can you see me? Because I can hardly see you. Okay, great. So I'm so excited to be here. I've been to Broward College in my other role as a higher education community college faculty member, but now I get to be here and talk to you about my love, which is ancient Egypt. And I'm going to talk to you about some aspects of Egypt that we don't often think about. When we think about the 2nd millennium, the 3rd millennium BCE, we think, well, they didn't have technology, and they didn't have science, and they didn't know what they were doing. They just kind of stumbled into things. Either that, or we think aliens helped them out. Those seem to be the two main schools of thought. So I'm going to show you just a few things this evening that I hope will change your thinking a bit. I'm going to read you a couple of things, too, because it's nice to hear in the Egyptian voice some of their thoughts about these things. And it's going to be a little bit of a hop and a skip around, but I always like to assume that not everyone knows Egypt as well as probably I do at this point, so I'm just going to give you a couple of basics, if I can get this to like me. There we go. Okay, so does this look familiar to some of you? The Nile River, right? One of the longest, if not the longest river in the world. It starts up in the mountains of Ethiopia. It's 2 Niles, the blue and the white Nile. They come together and they flow northward, which is unusual, into the Mediterranean Sea. So the Nile River, and we're looking at Egypt. Egypt is in to the northeast corner of Africa. Egypt is now, as it was in ancient times, the same geographic bit. So this long, there we go, very, very long rectangular nation. The modern boundaries are not that different from the ancient boundaries. And the river is the lifeblood of the Nile, and it's the lifeblood of Egyptians both in ancient times and today. So I've just dropped a couple of landmarks. You've got the Great Pyramids of Giza over there, and Giza, if you can see where I'm pointing on the upper left of the map, that's where Giza is. And then we've got the Great Temple of Ramses III at Abu Simbel, which is way down here in the center at the bottom of the map. So two major landmarks, monumental stoneworks, about 500, 600 miles apart. All right, so in brief, Egypt, yes, civilization along the Nile in northeast Africa. Its earliest origins of this civilization that we can say definitely is Egyptian, they date to about 3,500 or so BCE. Now, when I say BCE, I'm referring to before the Common Era. Some people say BC, I say BCE, which is common among art historians today. So 3,500 BCE, we start to get the earliest traces, actually little bits of writing, a lot of pottery, hints of what will later become recognizable Egyptian religion, even little bits of not full mummification, but bandages on hands and on necks of bodies that were buried. That culture, identifiably Egyptian culture, lasts for thousands of years. The twilight, we can say, of the culture is about 30 BCE. So this nation, we've been around since 1776, and we've changed an awful lot. The faith of the people in this country has evolved. Even folks who belong to the same church as they were in colonial times, it looks very different when you go inside today. Our technology, of course, has changed radically. Our way of life, everything has changed. Ancient Egypt, 3,500 years, some things the same from beginning to end. Language, it went through phases, like English has gone through phases in every other language. Religion, same gods, same prayers, same rituals, 3,500 years. What they did for a living, they mostly farmed. They did that for 3,500 years. But some things change. Technology always changes, so we'll look today at a couple of little things in technology, some that stayed the same, some that changed. But when we think about Egypt, we want to think about long period of continuity. Just a note on the chronology of Egypt, its history. So we divide it into three primary periods. That huge land I showed you, when left to their own devices, the Egyptians sort of broke in half into the north and the south, and great pharaohs unified the lands. And the periods of unification, we talk about the Old, the Middle, and the New Kingdom, and you can see the dates of them up on the slide. Before the Old Kingdom, that was that developing period. Sometimes we call it the pre-dynastic, because each of these unified periods are led by dynasties, families of kings. After the New Kingdom, the Persians come in, the Nubians come in, the Greeks, the Romans come in, and it's after the Romans that Egyptian civilization is pretty much wiped out. Their language, their religion, even their gene pool is diluted. So 3,500 years comes to an end under the Romans. All right, when we think about what the Egyptians believed, and I'm sure if I say, what do you think of first when I say Egypt, there's someone in the room who's thinking mummy, someone else is thinking pyramid, sphinx, maybe life after death. Egypt, as Lisa said, it sort of permeates pop culture these days. We've all seen the mummy in one generation or another, and we've seen a million Halloween costumes that look like pharaohs, maybe Cleopatra or Nefertiti. And we know actually a lot of truths. They were polytheistic, they worshipped many, many gods. In fact, they were so inclusive in their religion that over those 3,500 years, if they heard about another god from another civilization, and they thought, oh, that kind of makes sense, they would adopt that god. No discrimination against gods. There were gods in the sky, there were gods on the earth, there were gods that you could or couldn't see, there were good gods and bad gods, and they were all around us, and they were sort of all that mattered. because they affected our lives, but at the same time, you can kind of keep them at bay if you kept them happy. The sun was significant through all periods, whether it was the actual sun in the sky or some deity that the sun represented, always the sun. They believed in a cyclical concept of time. What do I mean by that? We think about time in a linear fashion. We are born, the years line up, they keep going, we die. We know that this is 2016. That means that last year was 2015 and next year will be 2017. They didn't think about things like that. They thought about this day repeats every day. The sun comes up, it crosses the sky, it sets, but it comes back up the next day. So time has just begun again. And think about a ruler, Ramses the Great. They don't care that from our perspective, Ramses the Great ruled around 1200 or so BCE. They say Ramses the Great ruled in year 1 of Ramses the Great. And he ruled in year 2 of Ramses the Great. And ruled year 3, year 4, year 5, etc. And after he dies, it's year 1 of somebody else. So time just keeps resetting. And when you believe in that, you've got to figure there are things you need to do to keep time keeping on this loop. Making sure that the sun comes up every morning and sets every evening. So they have this concept called ma'at. Ma'at, sometimes we translate it as truth, justice, or balance. It's this unseen force that fills the world, runs through life. And you need to keep it in the right balance, sort of in harmony with itself. Everything has a counterpart, a duality. There's good, there's bad, there's light, there's dark. There's morning, there's evening. And if you get too much of one thing, too much dry, you need to add wet. Too much light, you need to add dark. Otherwise, ma'at is unbalanced. And, from our perspective, we would fall out of orbit and spin away from the sun. From their perspective, time would just stop. And that was the job of the pharaoh, mostly, maintain ma'at. But everybody had a role to play. If we maintain ma'at, if we worship the gods, if we keep them happy, then this life, because time is a cycle, this life continues. Our body dies. No illusions. They don't think the body is going to get up and start walking around like a zombie or a Hollywood mummy. They know the body, when it's dead, it's dead. But the soul keeps living. We are sustained, all of us, in the Egyptian mindset, by a few things. Our ba, our ka, our ach, and our name. So the ba it's kind of our personality. There's one great Egyptian story in which a man gets into a fight with his own ba. The man is saying, I don't want to die. I like this life. Things are good here. It's bad to die. The boss says, what are you talking about? When you die, things keep going. You get everything you want. It's amazing. It lasts forever. And they actually have this kind of theological debate for a while. In the end, the Ba wins. The guy says, yeah, okay, you're right. It's not a bad thing to die. So the Ba has spirit, it's got spunk, it's got personality, and the Ba can come and go. When we're dead, the Ba leaves the tomb and it travels around. And it's what keeps going for us. The Ka, it's kind of our life force. That's what most people think of when they think of an Egyptian soul. The Ka is what keeps us living. Doesn't give us our personality, but it keeps us alive. The Ach is this interesting thing. It's sort of translated as our shadow. In one of the Egyptian myths of creation, we are created by a potter using a wheel, a pottery wheel. And at the same time as he creates us, he creates our Ach. It is our shadowy twin. It goes wherever we go, and it does wherever we does, and it experiences all of these things. It's mostly quiet, though. And then, of course, we have our name. And our name is so unique, it's only us. How many of you know the story of Rumpelstiltskin? The old story, not the Once Upon a Time TV story. In the old Rumpelstiltskin story, does anyone know how you can foil the evil Rumpelstiltskin?
By knowing his name?
By knowing his name, yes. The only way to beat him was to know his name. And of course, he figured no one's going to figure out my name. It's so bizarre. They do, and they win. To the Egyptians, the name was that powerful. So all of us have a name, and we have to cherish that name because it is part of who we are as much as our ba, our ka, and our ah. And that's why if you go to an Egyptian tomb, you will see images of the deceased. That's where the ba gets to hang out if the body is destroyed. But you will also see the name of the deceased written over and over again. So that if you really want someone to die and to be dead forever, you have to kill them in this life. You have to destroy their body. You have to destroy every image of them. And you have to destroy their name. It takes a lot to really kill someone. They succeeded in one or two instances of doing that. All of this sounds really unscientific, right? It's okay, we're going to get there. All right, art and architecture mostly comes from funerary context. Now, the reason for this is not that they didn't create things for life. It's that because they knew, and I'm going to speak as an Egyptian, so they knew that there was life after death, they weren't going to worry so much about the things that we would use during these 30, 40, 50 years. And let's face it, in ancient Egypt, if you lived to 50, that was a good, long life. This life is short, the next life is long. So things for this life, our homes are built out of wood and clay, and mud brick. But our tombs, they have to last forever, so we build them out of stone. And monuments for the gods as well, they have to live forever, we build them out of stone. So there's this funny imbalance in the archaeological record that we get a lot of death and funerary-related things. And it makes us think that the Egyptians were really kind of dark and death-oriented. It's not really the case. It's just how it looks to us. And just a word about the spoken language. Ancient Egyptians, part of the Afro-Asiatic language group. It has some similarities to Semitic languages. If you know modern Hebrew or Arabic, then you're familiar with the convention of a tri-consonantal root that you add on the front and the back to conjugate and decline. And ancient Egyptian is sort of like that, actually. It's a terrible language to learn. It's very, very complicated, and it's no surprise that only about 1% of ancient Egyptians were really literate. They spoke, of course, they just couldn't read. All right, so now you know some basics about Egypt. So STEM, science, technology, engineering, mathematics. When we're talking about life after death, and endless time, and spirits that travel around, we really aren't giving the Egyptians credit for what they knew. Now, sometimes they knew it in a way that they could do it, but not explain it to a modern scientist. And sometimes they really did. Usually, when folks are doing a history of Western medicine, they say, we got everything we know from the Greeks. However, if you read the ancient Greeks on medicine, they say, we got everything we know from the Egyptians. They knew that work had been done before them. We've conveniently forgotten that in our modern history. But I'll show you a little bit of medicine today. There are a number of career paths in ancient Egypt that you could have followed if you were interested in STEM. These are hardly all of them. I'm going to highlight a few. Food science. We don't think about food as science, but of course it is. And some fun ones and some really important ones in ancient Egypt. You could be a baker. There is a lot of science in that. You could be a brewer. What does a brewer make? What's beer? Yeah, absolutely. And you can be a vintner. You can make wine. So we'll look at that. All right, construction. That seems pretty obvious, right? If you're interested in math, if you're interested in engineering, physics, geometry, all that stuff. So when we think about construction, these days you go to the Home Depot, you buy whatever you need and you build. Maybe you go to that stone yard if you want nice counters and you pick a slab of stone, and we don't really think about where it came from very often. The Egyptians, if they wanted stone, they had to find the quarry, the location. They had to find the patch of stone within the quarry, cut the stone, move the stone, polish the stone, shape it, etc., etc., etc. When we're talking about a country that is 500 miles long, that has no engines, no motors, no mechanized anything like that. I'm talking about a lot of work. And some of the stones they quarried, and I'll show you a couple of pictures. Right now in New York at the Metropolitan Museum, we have a sculpture on loan from Germany, and it's sitting in the main lobby of the museum. They couldn't actually get it inside the Egyptian gallery because it's too tall and it weighs 9 tons. 9 tons, it's 1 block of stone. We couldn't move it far enough, but the Egyptians sure did, because they carved it from stone that was about 500 miles south of where the statue eventually got erected. We'll talk a little bit about how they did that. All right, so you might be the brains on the site, the quarry master, or you might just be the muscle on the site. But just because you're the one who's cutting and moving stone doesn't mean that you are not scientifically and mathematically knowledgeable and skilled. Because you put me with a big piece of stone, I'm gonna break it. If you put an expert in there, they'll know how to cut it properly. Craftsmen, architects, builders, all of these things, and then some in ancient Egypt. What about allied health? You know, these days, that's, they say, the growing field. Everybody should go into allied health. And it was a big profession in Egypt, too. Healers, surgeons, physicians. When I say field triage, I mean military triage. All sorts of specialists. Gynecologists, internists, proctologists, you name it, they had it. So I'm now going to give you a little taste of a few different things. Now, as we go, I'll take a couple of questions if they pop up during. I think we're a small enough group that we can do that. I'll also take questions afterwards, of course, but don't be shy. If you have something, I think I'll be able to see your hands. All right, brewer. So, beer. We think of beer, we're probably thinking of these guys on the upper right-hand corner there. It's not what Egyptian beer looked like. Why am I talking about beer at all? So you go to an Egyptian tomb, and you're going to encounter something like this. This is a funerary stela. It is a carved piece of stone, much like our gravestones, but it doesn't say just so-and-so with his years of life and death and a nice epithet. We have our image of the deceased. We have his name up at the top, and we have his biography. This guy's name is Nani, by the way. And in front of Nani, you see all of these great offerings. Because in your next life, you're going to be hungry, just like you are here. And so, the best thing to do is to give the deceased food offerings, so that they can be sustained in the next life. Now, of course, at the actual funeral, we will bring real offerings to the deceased. But eventually, those will get eaten up. So the images kind of magically stand in. If the food is gone, this food works. If the body is gone, this image of the body works. The Egyptians believe in what I'll call magic, but I'm not thinking Harry Potter. I'm trying to think of a good Harry Potter spell. I don't know, ridiculous, something like that. That's not what they talk about when they're talking about magic. They're talking about these sort of mystical, supernatural things that happen, like food becoming food, or a body becoming a body, or a worker in the next life being able to sort of pop off the stone and do a job. And what we see here in the offering table, we've got some vessels here, and here, this one for pouring. We've got some round objects, I'll come back to them. We've got a fish. This is a duck. You see that duck head? He's been plucked and probably roasted. That's why we don't see any duck feet here. We've got the head of a gazelle or an ibex, something like that. We have the leg of an ox, nice good cut of beef. Some other fish, other animal parts, another beverage here that he's hanging on to. This is a nice funeral spread. Meat, very expensive. Fish, pretty common. This actually represents a whole field. It's not just a few plants, but it's supposed to be an entire field of grain to sustain him. But what's fun here for this context are these round objects there and here, these conical shapes here, and these vats here, and of course what he's drinking. The basic offerings, if you got nothing else in your tomb, you want what they called 1,000 bread and 1,000 beer. Now 1,000 was sort of shorthand for almost infinite. Bread and beer, the two staples of the Egyptian diet. So the round things, these are loaves of bread, and so are the cones. They had different shapes of bread depending on what kind of bread it was. And the containers, what he's drinking, beer. Now, not big foamy beer that you drink fresh out of the tap. Egyptian beer, I don't think we'd like it very much. In medieval Germany, breakfast was frequently a warm gruel. Think about Guinness only with an oatmeal consistency and eggs mixed in. Yeah, right, gross. That was breakfast in medieval Germany. It's very good for you. Really, like, fattens you up and keeps you healthy and strong for doing, I guess, field work or something. The Egyptians, they didn't put eggs in it, but their beer was closer to that than what we drink today. It's very, very nutritious. And remember, this is pre-antibiotics and it's certainly pre-water filtration, so one of the best ways to keep your water safe to drink is to ferment it, because that kills the bacteria. So beer, fermented water with bread and sugar and stuff in it, is kind of like a healthy Gatorade / protein bar. Now, how they made it is really something else, and they were so proud of it, and it was so important that they spend a lot of time in creating artworks that depict it. There we go. All right, so this is one of my favorite artworks from ancient Egypt. You can find it in New York at the Metropolitan, and this is just one piece of many, many, many from the tomb of a man named Mekhet-Re. Mekhet-Re, he wasn't royal, he was nobility, he was wealthy. And knowing that in the afterlife, in the next life, he would want everything as good as he had it in this life, he filled his tomb with wooden models of stuff, boats, every kind of boat you can imagine, pleasure boats, fishing boats, vacation boats with little cabins in the back. He had carved images of men and women bringing him bread and beer and wine and linen and all sorts of great stuff. And he had houses built, one for the grain, one for sort of a stable where the animals were kept. He had one butcher shop where they would slaughter the animals and cut up the meat, hang it to dry. And he had this room, a bakery and a brewery. Bakery and a brewery together under the same roof. So this object, to give you a sense of it, I can kind of hold it, it's about that big, not huge. So the artist has removed the roof for us, so we're looking in. Now I want you to know that the wood and the paint is original. These were amazingly preserved in a stone tomb that somehow escaped the ravages of time. Now if you look carefully, what you'll see is that on this side of the room, notice especially here, you can see the dark hair of two figures. They're doing something on a white surface. Those are these women right here. And then in front of them, we've got these folks who you can't see very well. They're these two men right here. They are on the bakery side of things. Have any of you studied Egyptian art? Let me see, just kind of indicate with your hand. Only a few of you. If you look at Egyptian art, most of the time when you see men, you see that their skin is this color. When you see women, their skin is kind of yellow. Does that sound familiar to anyone? They always look different, the men and the women. But notice here, the men and the women have the same skin tone. The reason for this is that the Egyptian artist is saying, these are poor people. They're working class. The working class, they're out in the sun, they're doing labor out in the fields, everyone is equally tan. It's only the wealthy, where the women get to stay inside and do protected things, like weave. Women were responsible for making linen. So this isn't interesting as a side note, always important to notice the skin tone. This tells us something about class in ancient Egypt. No self-respecting wealthy woman would make her own bread or beer. But these women are grinding the grain. They're literally using stone to grind the grain to make flour. That's why it's white. And this guy here, you see how his hands are white? It's because he's got flour all over his hands. He's shaping loaves of bread. And this one back here, he's tending the fire to bake it. All right, fine, basic bakery stuff, nothing so exciting. It's what happens next door, just a doorway through. Here's where the science gets in. So they're taking loaves of bread here, but they're what we would call par-baked. They're not really baked all the way through. They're baked enough to give it a bread consistency, but not enough that it killed the yeast and all the natural bacteria in it. And they take these loaves, you see this guy? It looks like a baseball bat, right? He's about to pound up those loaves of bread. He's going to make them crumbly, messy, mushy stuff. He's going to put them in a vat. And then someone else, and I don't have him here, is going to add ground up dates. Maybe some nice flavorings, coriander. We actually put coriander in beer these days. Something else that might have some sugar in it. Because if you get sugar in there, that's how the fermentation happens. So then what happens is this mash, it's put in one vessel, and then someone else comes along after a certain amount of time and they start straining. They pour from one vessel to the next, trying to get some of that thick stuff out, make it a more drinkable consistency. And they're checking on it, checking how the fermentation is going, checking the taste. And when it's ready, it's shipped off to drink. And different folks were known for making amazing beer, amazing wine too. There were certain regions, just like we have today. And the ones who were good at it were the ones who had mastered the balances between the bread, the sugar, how far the bread had to be baked, how long it had to ferment. So these guys are the laborers. We don't see, we're never told who the thinker is, the brewmaster behind this. But we know he's there, because you can't accidentally create the same quality drinkable beer every day for 3,500 years. Now, even though the beer was very different than today, let's not think that they didn't get drunk from it. There are some great stories. We have a letter from a father to his wife about his son. So the father is off, he's working on a construction project. I'll show you in a second what he might have been doing. He's really, really worried about his son, and he writes to his wife and says, please tell him to be careful and not to drink so much, because it's going to ruin his reputation and he's going to get hurt. He needs to go home, stop drinking, focus on his studies. Same letter you would hear today. It says, son's getting drunk too much. Tell him to go home. So, they enjoyed their beer, even if we might not. So what was Dad doing? Construction. And we're going to do a little bit of a case study here. We're going to look at obelisks. Do y'all know what an obelisk is? This is an obelisk, yes. And technically speaking, an obelisk is a tall, we might say pyramidal, that means it ends in a point like a pyramid, monolithic stone carving. One piece of stone to carve that. Give you a sense of scale. You see these folks down here? Here's some tourists. So these little people at the base of the obelisk are about as tall as one of us. and it goes all the way up. And it's one block of stone carved its entire length. Obelisks were quite popular. They were carved typically out of either limestone or granite. Limestone is a much softer stone than granite. You're not going to see a limestone floor, but if you go to some big civic building, you tend to see granite floors. Very, very durable. We have a measure in geology, measure the hardness of a stone. Granite is, we call it the Mohs scale, M-O-H-S. So granite is like a Mohs 10, really hard. Limestone, depending on the kind of limestone, it's like a 4, 5, not that hard. So somehow they had to quarry this stone, and they had to move it and carve it and do all that stuff with it. Now, they knew where the major sources of stone were. Limestone, up around the pyramids where I showed you on the map, that whole part of Egypt is pretty much a limestone shelf. Scrape away enough sand, you hit limestone. Granite, way down in the south, on the other end of the map. Granite cliffs all around. And other stones, of course, as well, all over the place, but those were the two primary ones. So to do something like this involved not just choosing the stone and carving it, but also knowing the tolerance of the stone as you cut it. How tall could you make it before it would break? How could you get it out of the ground before it would break? How could you even carve it into the ground to begin with? And we know that this was complicated because they didn't always succeed. So this is the famous unfinished obelisk near Aswan. See all these people walking around on top of it? Gives you a sense of scale. It's enormous. This would have been, if they finished, probably the tallest obelisk ever to have been made in ancient times. Instead, it cracked. You can see the crack right around there. And there's another one forming down here. So they had gone pretty far in the carving of this obelisk when it cracked, and they had to abandon it. Is that a question? Great question. Yes. They find the stone, they carve into it, into this giant massive stone. And once they have shaped an obelisk, they bring it up. So how the heck did they do that? If it's this big and it's hard, you see these things up here? What do you think they are? Oh, yes, they are rocks. Very good. And I'll help you out. They're rocks that are about the size of a, I don't know, bigger than a grapefruit, smaller than a bowling ball. Maybe this size. What do you think they did with those rocks? Carving is one suggestion in the back.
Put them between other pieces of rocks, like a wedge kind of.
Okay, a wedge and maybe hammer down. All right, any other ideas? Weights, oh, that's a good thought. Yes. Crush them. All right, so you guys are thinking very creatively. Way in the back?
Slide the obelisk along on top.
Oh, slide the obelisk along that. I like that, kind of like ball bearings or something. So you have all thought of really great uses for those rocks, but none of you hit on what the Egyptians did with them. In order to make this deep trench around it, they took those stones. Those rocks are made out of dolomite, which on that Mohs scale is also about a 10, so very hard, but not really harder than the stone they're working on. And they pounded. Dropped them, dropped them, dropped them. Eventually, you bang one hard stone on another, it's going to crack. It's not easy, it's backbreaking. They went through thousands of laborers on these projects. People would die. And they kept at it. And they would pound away. Once they got enough of a hole going, then they would start to do some pretty clever stuff. They would light fires. Fire and stone. What do you think that would do? It seems like it should do nothing, right? We build our houses out of stone so they don't burn down.
Thermal shock, get it to crack.
Very nice. Can you explain that?
Well, it's just that the stone is going to be holding a lot of, coolness to it, and you get a very, very hot temperature against something very cold, and it's going to create some kind of a distress there, cracking this very rock.
Excellent. You take that nice cool rock, you heat it up very, very hot, and the heat and the cool are going to create thermal shock. The stone is going to start to crack. We're not talking the big crack in the middle of the obelisk, but we're talking enough to maybe make some of it crumbly enough that when you start pounding with your dolomite pounders again, you get a little bit more, a little bit further along. Then they do this other thing. If I say that wood can help you break stone, would you believe me?
Yeah.
Some of you are going to say yes because I said it, so you figure there's a reason I'm saying it. But, off the top of your head, you're thinking, no way. How could I possibly take wood and use it to break stone? What do you think? Yes?
And you can put the wood within the cracks and wet it, and then the wood will expand.
Oh, I love you guys. Yes. You put wood in a crack and you add water, and the wood expands. We know this if you have a wooden door and it's humid out and it gets all squeaky and stuck. Wood expands when it's wet. So if you have your stone that's been thermally shocked, maybe you've created some good spaces there, and you have expanding wood. Again, these are incremental movements, but it's going to help you crack the stone. And then when you get further down enough, you can start to use metal. And the reason they don't start with metal is that at this time in ancient Egypt, we're not talking about iron tools. We're talking copper and bronze at best. Copper's very soft. If you have a real copper penny, you can leave a tooth mark in it. And bronze is harder, much, but it's still nothing like iron. Nonetheless, they would use bronze and iron chisels and wedges and pound on them to try to break the stone away. And eventually they would succeed if the obelisk did not break. Now, how do you get an obelisk out of a hole? No rope, no amount of men is going to get that thing out. Not easily, not without probably dropping it and breaking it. So they did it the easy way, which is actually the hard way. And they would take probably this portion of stone, and they would carve it away. And then they would heave it horizontally out of the hole. So instead of having to lift it, they would slide it. And then the idea of rolling on rocks, I like that idea, but in fact what they would do is roll on wood. Because if you have wood and you wet it, it gets kind of slippery, and then it's not easy again, but it's easier. You can slide the stone out of that hole. So this requires a lot of knowledge of physics, of geometry, and of, I don't know what the science is. All the sciences involved. I'm suddenly thinking, I don't know what science it is that wood gets wet and slippery, or that stone gets hot and breaks. A little bit of physics, a little bit of organic and inorganic chemistry. You need to have some very specialized knowledge to make this work. And they did it, amazingly. So then what do? They need to get this thing 500 miles away. They did move a lot of things by land. They carved roads and they moved things along the roads. But Egypt did not have camels at this time. They had donkeys. Camels didn't come in until really quite late, around 900 to 1000 or so of the Common Era, as the spread of Islam was brought across by folks from the Arabian Peninsula. They brought their camels with them. Prior to that, donkeys, and donkeys are good and strong, but not this strong. So to move something like this, they went to the easier option, which was to move it by sea. I need the magic spot here. There we go. So this is a detail of a painting from the tomb of Hatshepsut. Hatshepsut is a very famous Egyptian pharaoh because she was a woman, actually, not a man. And she also accomplished quite a lot in her reign, including carving a number of obelisks and moving them. And she shows us that these boats were made and obelisks were put on them too. Do you see that? End to end, with the tops pointing away from each other. And here is the drawing showing you the scale of the obelisk compared to the men on the boat. Now they tell us there are certain boat captains. Remember I said they have biographies on their tomb stelae that tell us about what they did. And so there are some men who said, I built boats with 8 ribs to move the stones of the pharaoh. So we know that these weren't any old boats. These were really, really fortified boats on which they would slide the obelisk. And then, especially nice if you're moving from the south to the north, the current of the Nile takes you. It's a lot easier than dragging that stone. The interesting thing is, in modern times, European countries and the United States as well have made a habit of taking obelisks from Egypt and moving them elsewhere. Rome has about 7 or 9 of them. Paris has a couple. New York has one. I think maybe in Turin in Italy there's also an obelisk. They're all over the place. London has one. And the story of the New York obelisk is great because we know quite clearly how they moved it and how hard it was for them to move it. They couldn't get it up onto a ship deck. It was moved in the late 1800s. They actually had to open up the side of a ship, the hull, to slide the obelisk in. And it served as ballast as it traveled across. Now, a couple of other obelisks were lost at sea. Same technique, they were ballast, but the ship went down. So a few of Egyptian obelisks are somewhere in the Atlantic. But the one that they got to New York, they did get it. They had to use railroad steam engines to get it across, and this crazy contraption to pivot it up into place, and people almost died, and it was a giant fiasco. And that was with the technology of the 19th century. But the Egyptians did it on their little wooden 8-rib boats with wet wooden rollers and a lot of manpower. It helps if you believe that your ruler is a god, because when your god asks you to come and do something, you're going to do it. Now, before we think, wow, they're really, really rational, and it's amazing and we underestimated the Egyptians, let's remember that all those things are true. They are really rational. We do underestimate them, but there's a lot of symbolism and sort of magical stuff involved too. So the papyrus that you see up here is actually, we call it the rhymed papyrus. That's just named after a man. And it shows us Egyptian calculations. They are trying to figure out the proportions of these triangles. They also applied their study of triangles to calculating the slope of pyramid sides. They typically work with isosceles triangles and right triangles. Isosceles, all 3 sides are the same size, right? It's a right angle, 90-degree angle in one corner, and then you've got the slope. And they were so obsessed with these triangles, and they had a pretty good formula, nothing like the Pythagorean theorem or anything like that. They had their own concept of numbers and mathematics and the way it should all work. But they were so focused on the triangle because of this thing, the BENBEN stone. Has anyone ever heard of the BENBEN stone? Poor thing, no one has ever heard of it, but it was so important to the Egyptians. The BENBEN stone is one of the original stones in the Egyptian world to ever exist. It was the very first spot of earth that the sun touched, kind of a hill, when there was creation. And suddenly we emerged from, in one of the Egyptian myths, from this chaotic, soupy darkness. There emerged this mound of earth, and on it the stone, and the BENBEN stone is the primeval source of sun and life. Now think about it. If you think back to, I don't know, kindergarten, a little before then, and you draw a picture of the sun, right? I want you to, in your mind right now, draw a sun. And then what do? How do you indicate the sun's rays? All right, good. We've got some lines coming out. So if those lines carry down to the earth, they make a triangle. And that's what the BENBEN stone is. It is the outline, or it is outlined by the rays of the sun as they hit the ground. So a triangle is just the natural shape the sun will make. This is a little BENBEN stone. It's about yay high. And the Egyptians created them and they put them in ritual places. But when they really wanted to make a point, they incorporated the BENBEN stone into much bigger things. The very top stone of a pyramid, for example, or the very, very tip of an obelisk. And the tip of the obelisk was frequently covered with gold or maybe electrum. Electrum is an alloy. It's a mix of gold and silver. So the obelisk is the tallest thing around, taller than the temple it's standing in front of, and the top of it, angled like this, is gilded. And when the sun hits it, what happens? What happens? It shines, yeah. And because it's so tall, in the morning when the sun comes up, it bounces off of it. And in the evening when the sun goes down, it still bounces off of it. So the BENBEN stone at the top of an obelisk radiates life down to us, radiates the sun down to us. It's a simple geometric form that, because of its angles, reflects brilliantly. And so while the obelisk is a feat of engineering and mathematics, it is also the best they could do to capture, to harness the light of the sun, their God, their giver of life, and to extend it down into the temples and to the people. So if we think chicken and egg, which came first, definitely this symbolism, the superstition almost that you needed that sun in order to live. And then that just fueled this amazing scientific, mathematical, I'm going to call it a revolution. And medicine. So notice how we've been going up and up as far as the amount of training you need to do these things. You can learn a lot of this stuff on the job. Just like today, we can learn some pretty sophisticated science and technology and engineering and mathematics. In another life, I repaired computers. I never studied it. I got a job. They taught me what to do. I fixed computers. I thought, this is amazing. But then I hit a wall. I didn't understand how the microchips worked. I couldn't build them. I couldn't point to a circuit on the board and tell you what it did. There was that dividing line between practical knowledge and studied knowledge. And medicine in ancient Egypt acknowledges that line. There are many different types of people who practiced medicine one way or another in ancient Egypt. But some of them had to really study and some of them sort of apprentice themselves. So I've given you some of the Egyptian terms for these folks and a sort of explanation of what they are. The Senu, that's what we would imagine as your general internist, your physician, your doctor today. The Wab is a kind of priest. He's a priest of Sekhmet. Does anyone know anything about Sekhmet? Have you heard of her? She's amazing. She's ferocious. Sekhmet is a lioness, and she is very protective, because as a mother, she's very protective. But she's also incredibly ferocious and will kill quite easily if you annoy her. So, some can kill. Well, if you are aligned with that, and you can harness that power, maybe you can heal. So priests of Sekhmet were healers. And also, interestingly, they were sometimes veterinarians. The Cherub, a priest of Serket. Serket is a goddess who very few folks know. She's a scorpion goddess. Scorpions, they bite, it hurts. It can kill you depending on the kind. And so, not surprisingly, priests of Serket were known to be healers of bites and stings from poisonous creatures, and also to even be able to prevent these things. You can get a Sal, a magician, or you can get a Sahaman, a surgeon. Notice how in this list of medical professionals, there are words like magic and healer and priest. Doesn't make sense in a modern concept of medicine, but to the Egyptians, all illness was derived from an angry deity, a malevolent force, something that was out to get you. So while there was often a practical solution, something that you could do to heal the injury, to heal the illness, you were only treating the symptom if you just did that. If you didn't also calm down the deity who was upset, it would just come back. Because clearly, someone was causing this. Now, Egyptians, certainly they wouldn't know science and medicine like we do, but remember, because of mummification, they knew the internal organs very, very well. During mummification, Egyptian priests removed the lungs, the stomach, the heart, the liver, the kidneys. They knew all of these organs. And while they were in there, they encountered everything else. They didn't always know what it did. For example, to the Egyptians, we say, oh, I'm thinking so much, my head hurts, right? Because we know we're thinking with our brain. The Egyptians thought with their hearts. That's what they thought. So if they said this is really heartfelt, they didn't mean it was emotional, they meant it was intellectual. They thought it. And for us, we say, oh, my heart aches when we're feeling sad, when we're feeling emotional. The Egyptians would say, my stomach hurts, because their emotions were in their stomach. Think about it, you get really, really upset and your stomach turns in knots. So they knew the organs, they just attributed different effects and different functions to them. Now, this image, I love this image. Sometimes you see this doctored on the internet. I'm warning you right now. This is an actual image from Egyptian art showing us doctors' tools. Most of these are actually used in mummification. So we have, for example, here, this is a knife, a dagger. And the sharpest knives were made not of metal, but of stone. Because a really, really good flint can be sharper than anything else, and it will not dull. Not for a long time, especially not if you're using it to cut flesh. These hooks here, really helpful for sticking up a nose and pulling out the brain, which is what they did during mummification. We've got other kinds of knives, we've got hammers, we've got containers to put poultices in and herbs and things. We've got a sort of scale over here for weighing things, measuring. There's one story, a pharaoh has an eye infection, and he asks for the very best galena. Galena is a mineral that is used to treat eye infections. And so they say that the healer sent twice good, that means super good, galena, but it didn't work. And so the pharaoh sends it back and says, get me 4 times good. It's got to be really good this time, it's got to work. So they have a sense of the efficacy of these medicines, and some work better than others, and that sometimes the product is not as good as you think. You know, is it the difference between, I guess, a generic and the name brand medication? I don't know. Oh, the internet, sometimes you're going to see those, they change those objects and they make them look all cool and high-tech, and they say that it's alien implements. Don't believe. It's not. All right, now, medicine, you don't need to write this down, of course, but if you're interested in, there are tons of ancient texts, papyri, they wrote on papyrus, that are medical texts, and I'm listing here just a few of them for you. We know so much about Egyptian medicine because they, like any good scholars, wrote it down. So there's a gynecological papyrus. It's one of the oldest known medical texts, certainly the oldest from Egypt, the actual physical thing that survives, all about women's health. Think about it, reproduction, you know, it's always going to be an issue, always going to be dangerous. So it dealt with fertility, contraception, childbirth, recovery, all those things. The Edwin Smith Papyrus, a little bit later, it's the oldest known surgical treatise. It's a practical guide, a field guide in fact, for treating head and torso wounds. I'll share one of those with you in a minute. The Hearst Papyrus, it's an older text, but this actual papyrus that survives is younger. It focuses on the urinary system, blood, but also hair and bites. And the Ebers Papyrus, this is huge, more than 700 spells and remedies in there, and it treats everything, including depression. Isn't that amazing? They recognized mental illness and they tried to treat it. So these are the kinds of documents that the highly trained physicians would consult. And all those titles I showed you, the priest of this and the doctor of that, as you train more and more, you start to accumulate titles. So you're not just a physician, but you're also a Wa priest of Sekhmet. Or maybe you're a Wa priest of Sekhmet, but you're also a priest of Sirket. Depends. That way you are qualified to treat multiple illnesses. So this is the actual Edwin Smith papyrus in the background. And you notice that there's some text in red and some in black. So in this translation here, I've given you appropriately the red and the black. Now, why am I showing you this poor head? This is Kamosa. Kamosa was one of the, you could say, the last king of the 17th dynasty. He was one of the last kings before the new kingdom of Egypt. And the poor guy died on the battlefield. His whole mummy survived. I don't know why. I'll only show you his head here. It's a little bit gruesome for him, even. He was attacked at close range and brought down by battle axes and daggers. You can see some of his wounds. They took him off the battlefield and they mummified him as best they could, but his body clearly was suffering when he died. And this is the kind of wound that the Edwin Smith papyrus was designed to address. It comes from the very time when these battles are going on. So what does it say in the case of a gaping head wound? Practices for a gaping wound in his head which has penetrated to the bone. Now there are other wounds that they describe, ones where the bone is open, ones where the bone is cracked but not open, all sorts of different kinds. So it says you have to bandage him with fresh meat the first day. You have to put 2 lengths of cloth on him and treat him afterwards with an oil and honey dressing every day until he gets well. We're thinking, really? Your skull is exposed and this is going to help? Think about it now. The meat is going to keep it moist, which is very, very important if you want the flesh to try to close up a little bit. The oil, well, that's probably going to keep the cloth from sticking to the wound. And honey is known to have antibacterial properties. So although it's not the same as what we would do today, given what they were working with, it's a really nice prescription for healing an injury. It didn't help Kamosa, but clearly it helped some people or they wouldn't have spoken about it as helping. Now what I like is that all of these prescriptions, so to speak, they identify the wound, has some sort of a diagnosis. It tells the physician what to do when you get there. In this case, the physician has to look at the wound, he puts his hand in, feels around to see, is the skull there, is the skull intact? And then he says to the patient, you have a gaping skull wound. I will heal it. That's apparently part of the treatment. And then he goes on to do this stuff. And then there's actually a sort of a prognosis that tells you what's going to happen afterwards. I pulled this out. I wanted to share a couple of prescriptions with you. I thought they might be helpful for you. I don't know. All right. A lot of people these days, we see you get into a fight and our eyebrow splits. So if you have a wound in your eyebrow, then you say, first of all, the physician has to say to you, you have a wound in your eyebrow. This is an ailment I will handle. I guess that's reassuring. It's like saying, I'm a doctor, don't worry, you're in good hands. So now this is interesting. You close the gap with thread. So sutures. Now after you sew him, you bandage him with fresh meat, once again, for the first day. And if you find that the sewing has slipped, you may have to fasten it with cloth. And then you treat him with oil and honey every day. So I guess they realized if the head is open, no point in suturing. But if it's something small and fleshy like an eyebrow, go ahead. And I bet they had far more success, to be honest, with the eyebrow than they did with the head. Now, for those of you who are concerned you're aging a little bit, for rejuvenating the face. Actually, this is the second one for rejuvenating the face. The first was for renewing the skin. It sounds like a commercial today. So you're going to combine calcite powder. Calcite is limestone, basically. Powder of natron. Calcite powder 1. 1 what? We don't know, but the doctors must have known. Powder of natron 1. Natron is salt. Northern salt 1. Honey 1. Mixed into a compound and smeared on. So how stone powder and salt with honey is going to make you look young again, I'm not sure. But I imagine a lot of ancient Egyptians, as they aged, were running around with masks like this on. So you can see that their prescriptions treated everything. And they really were trying to be formulaic to determine amounts. They were trying to access ingredients that had good medicinal properties. There are some things that we know they used that they tend not to talk about. For example, we know from analyzing vessels that survive, they used opium at least a couple of times. Opium is an excellent painkiller, also highly addictive. They used marijuana at least once. At least that's what the scientific evidence says. They used some narcotics, they used a lot of herbs and spices, and they used a lot of prayers. All those priests, all those healers, those magicians that we saw listed, they practiced medical magic. Now this is an amazing artwork. This is also in New York. I tried to pick things from New York to give you a good excuse to visit my hometown. This is known as the Metternich stela. It's also a stele for Horus. Horus, the baby Horus, actually. So this is the whole object there on the right, and this is a detail of this front section right here. You see in the center, young child Horus. How do we know that he's a baby or young? What do you know about Egyptian art? Anything that says he's a baby? Yes, in the back.
Then he's not wearing clothes.
Yeah, he's not wearing clothes. Infants were shown, or young children were shown nude. And then the other clue is that his hair, he's got this one little ponytail on the side. They kept children's heads shaved, except for what we call a side lock, a little hair on the side that grew. So now you know if you're looking at Egyptian art and you see even just a head and it's got that, you know you're looking at a child. This is the young Horus. Now Horus is the son of the god Osiris. He's a significant god. He protects the king. And his mythology includes a very interesting time. He got into a fight. He was trying to avenge the death of his father. And during the battle, he was blinded. But then, through a complicated series of events, his vision was magically restored. So Horus, the young Horus, who was blinded and had his vision restored, is seen by the Egyptians as someone with incredible regenerative power. He can heal you because he himself was healed. And here he is. What do you think this monument is supposed to help heal? Snake bite? Why do you say that? Yeah, we've got these great coiling snakes here. What else do you think this might heal? Yeah, good. He's holding a lion here. So some other ferocious creatures, perhaps. His head is great. What's on his head is actually the head of a god named Bes. And Bes is a protector. So Bes tells us that not only is this a healing monument, but it's a protective monument. Now we have a couple of other creatures that are perhaps hard for you to see. Here's another snake, by the way. Right here And here, can anyone see those? Scorpions, yes. We've got snakes, we've got scorpions, we've got a crocodile down here. We've got all sorts of creepy, crawly, poisonous things and things that go bump in the night. Terrifying stuff that can hurt you. Now, you might notice the writing all around it. It's inscribed from top to bottom. This was popular medicine. This was civic medicine. This monument was set up in public at a water fountain. There would be water all around it, and people could come and use the water for healing. So, I love this. This is one of the many texts on it. Be spewed out, you poison. Come out on the ground. Now that Horus has enchanted you, you cannot rise up, trampled down. Weakened, you cannot grow forceful. Become craven, you cannot fight. Blind, you cannot see. Your head turned upside down, you will not raise your face. You cannot find a way. Versed, you cannot find a way. Saddened, you cannot become happy. Lost, you cannot open your face. Through what Horus, functional of magic, has said. So all of that was addressed to the poison that is in you. Horus says, poison be gone, you have become impotent, the sufferer will be healed. How was this magic delivered? Very simple. You drink the water from the fountain. You take some of that water and you put it on your wound. Because the water has been lapping around this medical monument. It's been absorbing the magical power of Horus. And so naturally, it has curative powers. Naturally, it can now heal you. Sometimes if you didn't have access to this, you could take a piece of papyrus and write some blessings from Horus down on them, and then you could lick it. And by eating the ink, the magical words would heal you. So, a little bit of real magic, a little bit of real medicine. You've appeased the gods, you've appeased your body, things are going well. So to the Egyptians, as much as the BENBEN stone is the sun, and we use signs to recreate it, as much as injuries are sourced from angry or malevolent deities, and we can use signs to heal them, or magic, or both. This was okay to the Egyptians. This made sense to the Egyptians. They had questions about it. They had no thought that this was weird or would ever be weird to anyone else. And I mean, I have to say, 3,500 years of one civilization, maybe they knew something we didn't know. Maybe not, I'm not sure. So, do you have any questions for me? Do I know how to read the language? I'm not very good at it, but yes, I do. I spent a very long time studying it, and it's a horrible language to learn. Yeah. It's, so the hieroglyphics are both phonetic and pictographic. Sometimes when you're looking at a picture, it is representing what it means, but sometimes it has a sound, and they spell words that way. Yes?
Was the blood thought to have healing power? Did they use it in medicine anyway?
That's a great question. No, they did not use the blood to heal. In fact, the blood, if anything, was considered perhaps to be much like in a lot of history, to contain poisons and things like that, or to contain evil. And so they didn't practice bloodletting the way Europeans did, but they would try to get some blood out. Yeah. So it wasn't a healer. Any other questions? I'm curious, if you had to choose a profession from the ones we just looked at, which one looks best? Yes. A builder, but not one of the laborers, right? No, you want to be one of the thinkers. Yeah, absolutely. I think I would too. Anyone want to be a brewer? Yes, of course. Definitely. I think that'd be fun too. Lisa, did you have a question? Can I speak a sentence? Let me think of a good one. No. I'm only remembering phrases right now. No, I think they just didn't teach us that in school. I never learned to curse. I could tell you the ruler of Upper and Lower Egypt, but it's not very exciting. Yes. Have I ever visited Egypt? Yes, many times. You go and you study the monuments in person, and it's so much better than looking at a picture. Any other questions for me? Yes?
I know there were many gods in Egyptian times, but can you name some of the major ones? Like,
Sure. The great gods. Okay, so there was a family tree of gods. Osiris and his brother Seth, and their sisters Isis and Nephthys. Osiris married his sister Isis. Seth married his sister Nephthys. Osiris and Seth both wanted to be king. They had a big fight. Seth killed Osiris. He chopped him up, scattered his pieces around the Nile. Isis collected them all, mummified them, bandaged them back together. Miraculously, Osiris was given life. And after he regained his life, he fathered a child with Isis, and that child is Horus. So, Horus is the son of a king who was miraculously born again. And Horus himself, as I said, was miraculously healed. So they're a very important family, but they're also a very important triad. The triad of Osiris, Isis, and Horus. Now, if that sounds to you like a father and a son and a devout wife, that similarity was capitalized. And when Christianity came into Egypt in ancient times, it was very easy to make a connection between Mary and God the Father and God the Son, and Isis and Osiris and Horus. There are plenty of other gods. There is Thoth, the god of wisdom. He's often shown as an ibis, sometimes as a baboon. There is Anubis, the jackal-headed god of the desert and the deceased. You have the lioness gods, Bastet, Sekhmet, both of them having similar ferocious powers. In one story, Sekhmet, she can't stop killing. She's blood-hungry, bloodthirsty, bloodlust. Killing and killing and killing. So the gods come up with a plan. They take beer, they dye it red, and pour it all over the land. And she thinks it's blood. And she drinks it and drinks it and drinks it, and then she gets drunk and she passes out. And that's the only way they stopped her killing. A lot of these gods in Egyptian thought are very dangerous, but can be tamed. And then some of you might have heard of the god Aten. The Aten, which is the sun disk, was worshipped by the pharaoh Akhenaten. He said, all those other gods, they're just different personalities of this one god, the Aten. So forget about them, worship him. He was another really significant one. Do you have a favorite pharaoh? I do. Well, I've got a couple. So Hatshepsut, who I mentioned, the female pharaoh, I just think she was kind of awesome because she did things at a time of peace that the other pharaohs couldn't do, and she pulled it off, this sort of gender revolution, for about 20 years. She was a really successful pharaoh. So I like her for those reasons. But personally speaking, poor Kamosa, the guy who died on the battlefield, his son, Ahmose, founded the 18th dynasty, founded the new kingdom of Egypt, re-established the whole nation after foreigners had taken over, brought about an artistic revolution. He's kind of one of my favorites. Ramses, he's too popular. Any other questions? Yes?
well, really, to get personal.
Uh-oh.
I want to ask you the origin, the meaning of your surname. Swiss or German?
My surname has nothing to do with Egypt. It's very, very popular in Central and Eastern Europe. Any questions about Egypt?
So if you're only go to Egypt once, is there a spot that's supposed to go to?
Yeah, wow. Yes. Okay. My desert island trip to Egypt. What are the essentials? What would I take with me? Gotta go to the pyramids. Pyramids are spectacular. To appreciate the scale, to appreciate that each block of the pyramid weighs over 2 tons and is about 3.5, 4 feet tall, you have to go stand at the base of the pyramids. And while you're at the pyramids, you get to go into one. You get to bend over to fit into the tiny passageways. And you get to see the reconstruction of a wooden ship that was buried at one of the pyramids so that the king in his afterlife would have his ship. It's spectacular. You also have to go to something called the Step Pyramid. The Step Pyramid is one of the, in fact, it's the first pyramid. We call it Step because it is literally steps. It's not smooth-sided, and it was the first in the evolution of architecture that would lead us to pyramids. It's the first monumental stone structure, and it's unbelievable. But then you have to get in a train or a bus or a boat and head down south because you have to go to Luxor and Karnak temples, which are the largest standing temples. And you get to go to the Valley of the Kings and the Valley of the Queens and visit the tombs, which are painted and carved in unbelievable ways. Then you have to get on another boat or a plane to go all the way down to Abu Simbel, which is the temple that I showed at the bottom of the map, and that is a huge temple for Ramses II that is on an island now, on the edge of Lake Nasser, a lake that was created in modern times by a hydroelectric dam. And then, of course, there are 18,000 other amazing things you should see. You gotta go to Hatshepsut's temple, and you have to go to the Horus temple of Edfu because it still has a roof. You get to go into an ancient temple with a roof. Now stop. You can keep going. Yes?
What are some good Egyptian food to try?
Egyptian food. I'll talk about food all day. So we know falafel, right? The Egyptians have a version of falafel. It's called tamaya. It's basically the same. It's a chickpea, fried chickpea paste in a ball. It's a little bit different than an Israeli or a Lebanese falafel. Their common street food is something called koshery. It is, you walk by shops and there are mountains of food in the windows. It's a combination of pasta, rice, and lentils with a tomato sauce, fried onions, and cumin. It's a pain in the neck to make because all of those things have to cook at a different rate, but they mix it all together and it's heavenly. Egyptian cuisine is the cuisine of the peasants, of the people. Very common breakfast is fava beans, stewed with some oil and some onions. And then there's a dish that is an acquired taste. It's called maluchia. It's, you know okra, gumbo, how it's kind of gummy? So maluchia is a kind of gummy green. Tastes good, but you really need to get past the gumminess of it. And then baklava. Always sweets. Any other questions for me?
Were the temples or pyramids at one time painted?
Oh, yes. Not the pyramids on the outside. On the inside, the pyramids were painted. And the temples were completely painted. It's very misleading now. We look at ancient monuments, both from Greece and from Egypt, and they look like just bare stone. In fact, in ancient times, they were very, very brightly painted, blues and reds and all sorts of colors. But most of that has come off, basically been sandblasted by time. Yeah. Okay, I'll take one more question and we'll call it a night. What was my motivation to study Egypt? You know how every kid likes Egypt? I don't know, maybe that's not true. In my world, every little kid liked Egypt. Either you heard about Egypt from the Bible, or you saw something on TV or in a book. So it started there. Most kids grow out of it. I never did. And so I got very, very fortunate, and I was taken to Egypt when I was 18. That was all it took for me to see those monuments. I got back and I said, that's all I want to do, and it's all I've studied ever since. And I'm over 40 now, so I fell in love with Egypt and just couldn't stop. I would be almost dead in ancient Egypt. So thank you so much. You've been really great. Your questions and your insights have been fabulous. If you have other questions, I'm happy to talk to you. And thank you for coming out post-tornado. Wow. So have a great evening.